Tonight, Macron's election gamble backfires as his party is beaten into third place in parliamentary elections. The man who's become the new face of the far right, Jordan Bardella, is on the brink of power and has this warning about his far left opponents.
That would mean insurrection, chaos, and economic disorder for our country.
A new political reality and some instability too. Protesters took to the streets overnight and could return depending on the second round result. This evening, from immigration to foreign policy, we'll ask what a populist French Prime Minister could mean for the UK and the rest of Europe. And we'll focus on the Category 4 hurricane bearing down on the Caribbean, the strongest storm in the region for 2 decades. Plus, the Supreme Court ruling that could see a president stand trial while in office. Find out what judges decided and how that affects the race for the White House. And as the US government is accused of offering Boeing a sweetheart deal, I'll hear live from the daughter of a man who died in a fatal plane crash. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We begin the programme with the race against time, now underway in France, a race to keep the far right out of power. Make no mistake, a populist prime minister would be a political earthquake. And the fact that it's even possible is partly down to one man, 28-year-old Jordan Bardella, the new, some would say mildly managed, new face of the National Rally. French President Emmanuel Macron chose to take a massive risk and call snap elections. He hoped that voters would remember what the party, led by Marine Le Pen, represents. He was wrong, and after casting his vote, he hid away from the cameras, plotting his next move. Even as thousands gathered overnight for a rally against the far right, the political negotiations were already underway to block candidates in the second round. But will that be enough? And what would any lurch to the right mean for Europe and the UK? How could it impact small boat crossings, or how France handles Russia and the war in Ukraine? We'll be discussing all that tonight, but let's get started with our first report from our international correspondent, John Sparks, who's in Paris.
This the moment Marine Le Pen has long dreamt of. Her hard-right party, National Rally, now standing on the cusp of power. And this man, Jordan Bardella, has played a key role. Party candidate for Prime Minister, he's garnered the biggest share of the vote, ahead of the leftists, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
I am reaching out to voters on the right, the centre and the reasonable left who don't want to see Jean-Luc Mélenchon become Prime Minister. That would mean insurrection, chaos and economic disorder for our country.
President Macron said a vote for the hard right or hard left would invite civil war. But members of his alliance have changed their tune. Better to vote with the left if it keeps out the far right. And parties on the left agree. Not one vote for National Rally, they say.
For those people who see the far right as a very direct threat, we have to fight to the end and make sure that France remains France.
So, 1 week of feverish campaigning for the seats in the National Assembly. And we'll see plenty of political horse trading as well, as candidates in some constituencies withdraw in exchange for favours elsewhere. It could be the only way to stop the far right from gaining an absolute parliamentary majority.
In the past, what we call the Republican Front, that is to say every party, whether on the centre, on the right, on the left, oppose the candidate from the hard right. That Republican Front has weakened, and therefore the hard right has increased its hold on the country.
Yet many in France will not tolerate the prospect of a government from the far right. And we saw protesters taking to the streets after the initial results were released. National Rally's policies are divisive, but party officials think they make perfect sense.
Yes, some people are afraid, but they should not be afraid, because what we're proposing to the French electors is common sense. It's normal that in France, French people would be the priority of the French government, and that the foreign people would be taken care, of course, but after the French citizens.
National Rally are likely to form the largest bloc in Parliament, but their presence and their policies will be fought. Here in Paris, thousands have been mobilizing to defeat the hard right. But National Rally are the new reality in France. John Sparks, Sky News in Paris.
Well, as we've been reporting, the far-right National Rally and its allies, led by Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, won just over a third of the vote, while the left-wing coalition, the New Popular Front, came in second place on around 28% of the vote. And the centrists, Together for the Republic coalition, led by President Macron and Prime Minister Gabriel Attal's Renaissance Party, lagged in third with just under 21%. The second round of the election will take place next week, July the 7th. The far-right need 289 seats to win an outright majority. Even if they do fall short, but they do win the second round, President Macron will be forced to appoint the party's chief, Jordan Bardella, as Prime Minister. It would be the first far-right government of France for several decades. Well, let's go straight to our John Sparks, who's in Paris tonight. And John, no doubt many in France holding their breath as this race against time to try and figure out what's going to happen next. We haven't seen the President Macron, today at all, other than when he cast his vote.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose we would have been expecting to see him out on the streets begging and pleading with people to vote for his centrist alliance, and we didn't see that at all. But actually, that is pretty typical for this stage in the process. He will have been in his office, possibly the office of his Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, as well, and they will have been going through the constituency lists to see which candidates had made it through to the second round, because they're looking to do deals. They're looking to do deals with the leftist alliance, because, in effect, they have done a pact. They've done a deal with the leftist alliance to try and outflank National Rally. That's what's going on. And they've got until 6 o'clock tomorrow, I believe, to put in their candidate lists for the second round of voting on Sunday. So that's what's going on. It's effectively a pact with the leftist alliance to outflank National Rally.
Yeah, John, as we said, we've seen some protests, a little bit of violence on the streets. Are we expecting more protests over the next week?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think what's happened here is it has tapped into something, the results from the first poll has tapped into something deep and something really raw in French society. It was interesting last night on national TV, you had two MPs debating each other. An MP from the leftist alliance, an MP from National Rally, and he got irritated at one stage and he said, I've had enough with Hamas. He said Hamas because parties on the left have made much of advocating for the rights of Palestinians, and she retorted, I've had enough with Vichy. And that is a reference to the roots of National Rally. They trace their roots back to Vichy France, to the collaboratist regime. Just goes to show how raw things are, I think. Yes, thousands of people are going to come out and demonstrate. They will not tolerate the presence of National Rally, its policies, its presence in French politics. But you know what? The electorate has moved to the right in France. And I feel like you've got two immovable forces coming into conflict. We're probably just at the beginning of that.
Yeah, indeed we are. We're watching very closely. John, thank you so much for all your reporting there from Paris. So there will be manoeuvring behind the scenes and deals being struck between Emmanuel Macron's party and those on the left, as John was saying there. The hope is the leftist and centrist parties can work together to prevent National Rally from securing an outright majority, but NR don't expect the tactic to work. Earlier, I spoke to one of the candidates from the party, Charles-Henri Gallois. Have a listen to what he had to say.
We will see how it will go, but I'm still quite confident we can get this majority in the parliament. I don't think this kind of thing work anymore in France, you know, when they say you have to vote against National Rally.
There are many who are concerned across Europe about your party coming to power and what that would mean for the future of France and what that would mean for the future of France when it comes to its relationship with the European Union.
No, I mean, we have clear priorities for the French people. We have three main priorities during this campaign, which is purchasing power. We want to lower taxes on energy to give back to the French people purchasing power. We want also to lower immigration, and we want to protect French people from insecurity with the issue of justice too laxist in France and also in the migration part. So it's quite clear. Maybe in some parts of our manifesto we will need to face the EU, but I think I don't think the people should be worried about, because I think it's this kind of priorities are widely spread across Europe, and I think many Europeans agree with these priorities, even
including remaining united when it comes to support for Ukraine, for example, because of course your party is known to have quite close relations with Russia.
No, that's not the case. What we said about the Ukraine war is that Russia shouldn't invade Ukraine, so we should support Ukraine at the defensive level. But still, we won't support Ukraine to have offensive weapons. We won't support Macron to send French soldiers to Ukraine, because we consider that it's not a war which is vital for French interests, and we consider that no French soldier should die for this war. So it's quite basic. It doesn't mean to support Russia.
If we look at your party, I mean, it has rebranded itself, it's repackaged itself. The messaging feels much softer than the founder of the party, and also obviously Marine Le Pen, the daughter of the founder. It feels, at least on the outside, that the messaging has softened, but ultimately the ideology when it comes to immigration, for example, on globalization and France's position in Europe and globally remains the same, does it not?
No, I mean, Marine Le Pen has a different position from his father. No one in the world has the same position as his father. You have individualism and you have individual freedom. So it's a different position from the past Front National. But then I don't think to say we need to lower migration, and you know something about it in the UK, I don't think it's something from far right to say you have to lower immigration.
You yourself was viewed on some level as the face of so-called Frexit. How do you feel now about France's relationship with the European Union?
I mean, everyone knows what I think about the European Union. Everyone knows my opinion, but then I'm a candidate for the National Rally, so I just stick to what the National Rally Manifesto is. And National Rally Manifesto is that we should take back power from Brussels, and we should negotiate to take back some powers.
Member of the National Rally Party there. Well, joining me here in the studio now is Professor Rainbow Murray, who specialises in French politics. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, I think what's so extraordinary about the National Rally Party is its evolution, its rebranding of itself, its repackaging of itself. I don't think, we've seen anything like it in Europe, and we've seen other parties do it, but from where it was to what it is today, and the way that it's been handed over from father to daughter and now this very young man is quite extraordinary, actually.
It is, and it's been a slow burner. This hasn't happened overnight. It really started when Marine Le Pen took over the leadership in 2011. She was very conscious of the need to rebrand. She brought in a softer image than that of her father. She's quite savvy. She has pictures of herself on Instagram with kittens, trying to really give it a different approach rather than being associated with the more hardline, sort of macho side of the party. And her programme for a long time has been what the French call de-demonisation, which I think in English was more like detoxification. So she's tried to ditch some of the more offensive baggage. And she's tried to rebrand, make the party more mainstream, more likeable, soften some of their images, some of their policies. She rebranded the name of the party, got rid of National Front with all of its negative connotations and rebranded to National Rally. And then the last successful manoeuvre was for her to step back a little bit and allow this young man that you mentioned, Jordan Bardella, to come in as the leader. He's 28 years old, he's extremely charismatic. He doesn't have the Le Pen surname, so he doesn't carry all the stigma that came with that previously. And the party are now quite consciously marketing themselves at a new audience, at a younger audience. They're targeting young voters with
which he's been quite successful at doing. Let's have a look at some of those policies, because one of the things that they, certainly Marine Le Pen often pushed, she was very Eurosceptic and talked about not being part of the European Union. That's gone out of the manifesto now. But I just wonder, are these ideologies there simmering under the surface still?
Oh, yes. This is a change in marketing strategy rather than a fundamental change in who the party are and what they stand for. So they no longer talk in so many words of Frexit, but they still don't like the European Union. They still don't want to be part of the European Union. They're just finding ways to obstruct and block the European Union rather than formally exit, in the same way that they may have softened a little bit of their language on things like immigration, but ultimately they are still pretty xenophobic, they are still quite racist.
We'll get to immigration in a second, but on the fact that France's EU contribution, for example, they want a €2 billion euro reduction. They make it quite clear. It's almost like the America First ideals. They sort of talk about French, interests first, France's interests first.
Yes, as though the two are mutually exclusive, that if you're part of the European Union, you're not putting French interests first, whereas a lot of people would argue that it is in France's interests to be part of the European Union. And it's an easy target as well, because they are promising the moon on a stick in their manifesto, spending money left, right and centre. Where's the money going to come from? This is how they're going to finance all of it, by taking money away from France's contribution to the European Union. So it's also a kind of way of avoiding having to address financial reality for their other policies.
Yeah, and I'm keen to get to immigration, but let's just talk about Ukraine, because we just heard there from one of the candidates saying, look, we stand firm with Ukraine, but we don't need French troops, for example, on the ground, which is something that Emmanuel Macron had proposed a little while ago, hadn't he?
Yes, they don't want French troops. They also don't want missiles being handed to Ukraine. So they are happy to sort of say with a smile, yes, we support Ukraine, but it's hot air. The fundamental support that Ukraine needs, the actual commitment to resources to back that up, just isn't there with them. They don't want to get involved in another country's war, and they also don't want to get on the wrong side of Russia, with whom they've previously been fairly cosy. So they are downplaying that Russian connection because they know it doesn't sit well with voters, but any commitment to Ukraine is pure lip service.
And finally, the hot topic always with this party is immigration.
Yeah.
That in itself, the underlying messaging, the overt messaging sort of feels like it's changed, but the issues are still remain the same.
Yes, the issues still remain the same. For example, they want to get rid of what in French is called the droit du sol, which means basically if you're born on French soil, you're still not automatically entitled to French citizenship. So what they're saying is that second and even third generation immigrants aren't necessarily going to become French through sheer longevity within France. And what that achieves is that it continues to other anyone who comes to France. You can never be truly French if you have any origins from beyond France.
Including security clearance, for example, in certain jobs.
Yes, and if you have dual nationality as well, they're saying that certain jobs are no longer available to people who are only part French. So even dual nationality is no longer going to be enough to be considered worthy of full access to things within France, which is a little ironic, actually, considering that one of their main advisors has dual citizenship, French and Russian.
Yeah, indeed. We'll have to see how this all evolves over the next week. Professor Rainbow Murray, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay with us, because coming up, we'll be focusing on Hurricane Beryl. That's as 150-mile-per-hour winds hit Grenada and a dangerous and extremely powerful storm sweeps over the Caribbean.
Get the full story first. This election on Sky News.
We have a sensational team lined up for you in our virtual studio.
We're going to bring you all the breaking news.
We're not just going to be focusing on Westminster. We're going to look at the whole picture.
I will be showing you lots of the data, the analysis, breaking it down.
Sky News election coverage will go further. It will work harder.
What is our country going to look like after the election?
Of course, we'll bring the facts. We're also going to have some fun.
Seriously, people, you won't want to tune anywhere else. You get the full story first on Sky News.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back to the programme. A Category 4 hurricane described as extremely dangerous has been battering parts of the Caribbean. Hurricane warnings are in effect for islands like Barbados, Grenada, Tobago and St. Vincent and the Grenadines after life-threatening winds and storm surges. Let's just have a look. The hurricane made landfall over the Grenada's Carriacou Island earlier today. The Prime Minister said it was flattened in half an hour. The hurricane strengthened in warmer waters and is expected to continue to do so, hitting Jamaica on Wednesday, before continuing westwards towards Central America, which it is expected to reach by Friday. Well, the strong winds are just short of a Category 5 storm. Several islands are experiencing heavy rain and damage to homes and some streets covered with tree branches and debris. A tropical storm warning is in effect in the island of St. Lucia. Let's go straight to our next guest and speak to Simon Prower, a 55-year-old airline consultant from West Sussex who is currently on the south coast of St Vincent. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining us here on the programme. Just tell me what it's been like over there for you. The pictures look quite frightening.
Yeah, hi. It's been an interesting 6 or 7 hours. We arrived a couple of days ago into St Vincent, having been touring a lot of the Grenadine Islands for the last 12 days. And yesterday was just mad preparation, everything being tied down, secured, etc., with all the local teams doing a great job. But yeah, it clearly took them by surprise with how quickly the tropical storm escalated into a hurricane.
Yeah, and what have you been seeing? Because the images we're seeing are of roofs being ripped off, for example, and a lot of damage.
Yeah, so we're in a hotel down on the south coast, overlooking a marina, and it's been incredibly dramatic there today. There's a degree of protection in the marina, but it's been we've seen a number of boats break their moorings and float away. We've seen at least one boat that's been sunk, etc. There's clearly a lot of damage in the area. We haven't ventured out from the hotel yet, obviously, but there's clearly a lot of local damage.
Yeah, I mean, it's being described as life-threatening and dangerous. Are there any reports coming in of what the situation is? Obviously, you're holed up in your hotel.
We've not really seen anything outside sort of our immediate local area, so can't really comment any further. We've seen a lot of social media from the island around storm damage, flooding, roofs ripped off, etc., as you comment. But certainly in our local area, there's a lot of obvious damage, and as I said, boats that have broken away, trees down, etc. So. And people have just started to appear in the last hour now that it's dying down to start surveying the damage.
Are flights still cancelled? Do you know what your exit strategy is at this stage?
We were due to leave here last night, but obviously last night's flight was cancelled, and we've been rebooked for next Saturday, so a 6-day delay, which obviously isn't ideal. We need to get back for work, etc. So we've got flights secured for 6 days' time. The problem we've got is hotels, because lots of the hotels were fully booked for carnival season here. So there's a bit of uncertainty around hotels. We're actually going to try and get over to Barbados in the next couple of days if we can, because at least that gets us more options to get home, whereas the flight options from St Vincent are obviously a bit more limited.
Yeah, well, Simon, we hope you and your family remain safe. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you very much.
OK, let's speak with our science correspondent now, Thomas Moore, who joins me here in the studio. I mean, quite extraordinary how quickly this has managed to move and the level of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really an unusual hurricane for the time of year, tracking much further south than normal and much, much stronger. And that's what's really concerning a lot of scientists, that this could become part of a trend, certainly for this year and perhaps further into the future too. Now, what's causing this? It's down to two things. One is sea temperatures out in the mid-Atlantic, which is the maternity unit for hurricanes. The water temperatures are much higher than normal, more like you would expect for late August, perhaps into September. And that is the fuel for these big beasts. That is the water temperatures rising up, providing the heat, and that really sets these rotating winds. And the other reason is the waning of El Nino, the weather pattern out in the Pacific, which can have ripples around the world, and that's reducing the speed of high-altitude winds, and that helps hurricanes form.
Thomas, you said that, the temperatures in the waters are much higher, something you'd expect in, say, August. But is this now the new normal?
Well, the National Hurricane Centre thinks this is going to be a really strong season. Now, that season runs between June and September. We're already on the second storm of that season, and they're expecting perhaps between 4 and 7 major hurricanes. That's hurricanes with wind speeds over 111 miles an hour. Normally, you'd have just 3. That is a measure of the big change they're expecting this year.
So how do these communities prepare themselves for this drastic and sudden change?
Yeah, I mean, this was an explosive intensification. It took just 42 hours for this to change from a depression to a major hurricane. That rapid build-up of wind speed can be really dangerous because it doesn't give people that time to prepare. Now, a lot of these communities do have access to shelters. They got very good plans for boarding up buildings, getting to high ground and that kind of thing. But if you've only got a short amount of time, that's very difficult to see through.
Is that unusual, having that short space of time?
Very unusual, and that's possibly something to do with climate change in the future, that you will see more of these explosive intensifications, perhaps not more hurricanes, but more severe hurricanes carrying more rainfall, moving more slowly, and that could bring much more flooding for these communities.
It's deeply worrying. Thank you so much, Thomas, for all of your analysis there. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Coming up next after the programme, find out why a Supreme Court justice has described Donald Trump as a king above the law. Now, a consequential ruling by the US Supreme Court, which means Donald Trump could be partially immune from prosecution for his actions as president. Mr. Trump had faced charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election result. But today, the court said Mr. Trump had some level of immunity for official acts carried out while in office. Well, let's go straight to our James Matthews, who joins me live from Washington. And James, this is a major victory for Donald Trump.
It is indeed, Yalda, a victory for Donald Trump, and one that has far-reaching consequences actually for the rule of law in this country. In terms of Trump himself, at the heart of this is January the 6th and his alleged involvement in that. He has been accused of being the inspiration behind the Capitol riots that we witnessed, and he was going to go to court on March the 4th to be tried on that. There has been delay. His lawyers have gone through the courts, ultimately to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, to say you cannot prosecute Donald Trump for this because he was a president acting in an official capacity. Therefore, he should have the protection of immunity. Today, the Supreme Court has delivered its judgment, and for Donald Trump, it is a victory in part. This was a Supreme Court decision on a former president and the power of the presidency. Donald Trump on the docket drew a crowd, not the supportive kind.
He's got immunity.
They learned of a court decision to give him immunity from prosecution, in part.
I think it's another cop-out by a corrupted Supreme Court.
I'm shocked. I really thought the Supreme Court would come to its senses.
This is about the January the 6th riots at the Capitol and Donald Trump's alleged role in it.
We fight like hell.
He's been due to face trial for spreading false claims about the 2020 election, blocking its certification and intimidating voters. But Trump's lawyers argued to Supreme Court judges that he should be immune from prosecution as a former president. The judges partly agreed. They said a president should have immunity for official acts carried out in office, but not for acts deemed unofficial.
What Jack Smith has to do now is go back to his indictment and go through it line by line and decide which allegations now are immune from prosecution and which are not and can survive.
More than 400 people have been jailed since the riots at the Capitol. The criminal pursuit of the man accused as their inspiration just got more complicated. And so a lower court will now decide what can be prosecuted, the difference between the official act of a president and an unofficial act. It will almost certainly delay Donald Trump's election subversion trial beyond the November election. Donald Trump called the Supreme Court decision a big win for our Constitution and democracy. Republican-appointed judges carried the day, including 3 chosen by Trump himself. There was bitter criticism from the Democratic-appointed minority about a president insulated from criminal prosecution. Justice Sonia Sotomayor gave examples. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organises a military dissenting coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. With fear for our democracy, I dissent, she said. It is a significant story, even if the plight of the sitting president remains front page. The First Lady and close family are said to be backing Joe Biden to carry on.
He did not a single thing to stop it, nothing.
In a same-day political advert, the Biden campaign exploited the January the 6th issue. With their rival on a roll, they need the distraction.
And James, I just want to pick up on a point that you made there in your piece about the makeup of the Supreme Court and the sort of majority, the conservative majority, which of course is something that Trump helped create.
Indeed, yeah. This was a 6-3 Republican majority, Yalda, and of course 3 of the 6 were appointed by Donald Trump himself. So the accusation levelled by opponents certainly is that this was a decision loaded by politics and loyalty to the man who put them in place. And bear in mind, the Supreme Court waited until the very last day of decision making to issue their ruling. It has taken 9 months of litigation through the courts. It could scarcely have taken any longer to get to this stage. And of course, what it means is that there is a squeeze now on the timing of the trial. As I said in my piece, you've got the November election. The judge said she would allow 3 months between this decision and the start of trial for preparations. So, you know, best case scenario in terms of prosecution, you're looking at an October start. That will be too late. So it's good for Trump. And of course, if he wins the presidency, he can use the machinery of office to make it all go away. But big worries beyond Donald Trump in this particular case, principally for the rule of law. You heard about from the dissenting judge there. Big questions being asked about presidents in future. Presidents who perhaps want to go rogue, corrupt presidents without a rule of law. And in that set of circumstances, concerns that there would be a narrowing of protections for the American people from the power and increased power in the Oval Office.
James, thank you so much. Let's go to Gaza now, where the Israeli military has ordered a mass evacuation in part of the second largest city, Khan Yunis. The order is specific to the eastern side of the city and is being viewed as a sign that Hamas may have regrouped in the area. Earlier in the day, the IDF unexpectedly released dozens of Palestinians from detention, including the director of the Al-Shifa hospital facility. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has this report.
55 Palestinians detained from Gaza have been released. Among them, Dr. Abu Salamia, the director of Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa. He's been freed after 7 months in detention. Israel alleges that the hospital was used as a command and control center for Hamas operations. Dr. Abu Salamia says that he was tortured.
The prisoners have gone through what no prisoners have suffered in the history of the Palestinian people, even since the Nakba. From physical humiliation, mental humiliation, not being fed or not being provided enough food, not giving them clothes. When you need treatment there, you get tortured at the hands of a doctor or a nurse. This does not happen anywhere in the world, to have doctors and nurses punish a prisoner.
Sky News cannot independently verify the accusation. We have approached the Israeli prison service. It is not clear why these prisoners were released and now, perhaps to free up prison space. But it also raises questions about whether they were in fact guilty of what they were accused of. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the decision to release the director of the Shifa hospital a severe mistake and an ethical failure. He doubled down on the war effort and the mission to eliminate what he called Hamas's terror army.
Our forces are operating in Rafah, in Shajaya, everywhere in the Gaza Strip. Every day they eliminate dozens of terrorists. It is a difficult struggle that is waged above ground, sometimes face to face, and also waged underground.
Al-Shifa was, like many hospitals in Gaza, totally destroyed. The destruction of civilian infrastructure is a war crime, but the Israelis say that Al-Shifa hosted terrorists in a complex underground tunnel system. The Palestinians deny that and say that Israel has produced little evidence. Meanwhile, the conflict in Gaza continues. A mass evacuation order ahead of a looming ground assault in Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, was ordered today. But Israel says that the intense period of fighting in Gaza is now days away from concluding. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Stay with me, because coming up we'll be hearing from a grieving daughter. She has told me that she's devastated at news the US Department of Justice is to offer Boeing a plea deal over 2 deadly crashes involving its jets.
There was certainly a feel-good factor and spectacle. I felt there've been glowing reviews all round today, but I felt in the crowd that it had a very saggy middle. I mean, we all get to that point in middle age anyway, don't we? But it did. It got lost, and underneath all the spectacle and the guest stars and the strange cover versions of their own songs, and also new and obscure tracks, it all got a bit lost in the middle. They recovered at the end with Fix You, an amazing sing-along, and then they finished on a new single. I don't know who finishes on the new single. No one does that. And Coldplay should be long enough in the tooth to know to finish on a big one like Shiver, for instance. Yeah, it was really moving because the story is that Coldplay were inspired to form a band when they watched Back to the Future, and he got on stage and played Johnny B. Good in the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, I think it was called, in Back to the Future. And Coldplay were inspired to form a band from that. So it was a really special moment for them to bring out their hero, and it was really moving on sight as well, because it's an iconic film for so many people, including me, and to see him there playing the guitar and obviously enjoying it and being in awe of the crowd was special. And Michael Leavis straight afterwards as well.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolution. It's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Welcome back to the programme. The airline manufacturer Boeing has been shrouded in controversy for years. A shocking incident in January when a door blew off an Alaska Airlines flight was just the most recent in a string of problems. Now, the US Justice Department is expected to charge the airline maker with fraud over 2 fatal crashes. Well, in October 2018, a Lion airplane took off from the capital Jakarta, headed for the island of Sumatra. Only 13 minutes into takeoff, it crashed, killing 189 people. The official report listed inadequate pilot training and maintenance problems as reasons for the accident. Only 5 months later, in March 2019, an Ethiopian Airlines flight took off from the capital Addis Ababa. Just 6 minutes after takeoff, the Boeing-manufactured plane crashed, killing all 157 people on board. State investigators in Ethiopia concluded that a faulty sensor caused the aeroplane to take what they called an unrecoverable nosedive. Now, there are reports Boeing could be offered a plea deal, which has angered bereaved families. In a moment, I'll be speaking live to Mark Lindquist, a lawyer for families whose loved ones died in those 737 MAX crashes. And here in the studio, I'm joined by Zipporah Courier, whose father died in that 2019 Ethiopian Airlines crash. Thank you so much both for joining us here on the programme. Zipporah, I'll come to you first. The plea deal, I mean, this must be just so devastating and shocking for you to have to deal with this after years of campaigning?
I mean, it's emotionally exhausting. It's been 5 years, and you ask yourself, what has been the point all along? We've engaged with the Department of Justice on so many occasions where they have given us so many I don't knows, and we're trying to do our best. We've provided them our best as family members and our lawyers. We've acted more as investigators and experts in matters that don't concern us really. We've done a lot of their job for them, and still they keep making the same decision. I think devastating is an understatement as to how we feel as families, because it's gone back to giving Boeing the power to self-regulate, stuff like telling them to put in a monitor, independent monitor, to make sure that they're not self-reporting. It's stuff that the DOJ have looked at and said, it was really fun, it was interesting, but we don't think that that's necessary. It's heartbreaking because the death of 346 people really deserves more justice than what we're seeing.
What would justice look like for you? Because, I mean, when you look at the plea deal, for example, it's to pay a fine, face a 3-year term of probation and work under a corporate monitor. What does justice look like for the death of your father?
I mean, for starters, this doesn't look like justice at all. It doesn't even acknowledge his death, the plea deal. And I think justice for us would, look like an independent monitor, which would be a big motivator for change in behaviour, because you've actually got somebody who doesn't have your vested interest vetting the changes you're saying that you're making. I think prosecution for a lot of the decision makers that were at play, Muhlenberg, David Calhoun, and the rest of the board members that were there, and all the other managers, the people that have been retaliating against the whistleblowers that we have sadly lost over the years. I think that's what justice would look like. And ultimately having this plane grounded, but also just a shift in Boeing culture. I think justice for us is forgone. My dad's not coming back.
Did you think that there ever would be a criminal conviction? Just in your conversations with the DOJ, the campaigning you were doing, what you were hearing from lawyers?
Absolutely. I mean, we were speaking to the Department of Justice and they were talking about federal manslaughter. Or you look at other countries that have, like, for instance, the British coroner, deemed this wrongful death. In France, they're calling it manslaughter. You'd think that if the common sense of other global justice systems are seeing what is wrong with this, that we would expect the United States Department of Justice to recognise actually people have died, but that doesn't seem to translate. It's fraud has taken place.
What do you think will happen now then? What will you do?
I think we will keep fighting. I think that the one thing about experiencing what we have experienced in the last few years is it's been so atrocious in terms of you wouldn't want your worst enemy to go through it. And I think as family members, there's a part of us that has decided we won't relent. So if there's a way to appeal, we will appeal. And we have one of the best lawyers. I mean, Paul Cassell doesn't rest. To begin with, they said we weren't victims. We fought and then we were seen as victims. So we'll just keep fighting until something changes.
Zipporah, I'll keep you there because I'd like to bring in Mark Lindquist now, that lawyer who for families whose loved ones died in those 737 MAX crashes. I mean, Mark, we're just listening to Zipporah. As she said, her father died in that crash, the Ethiopian Airlines crash. This is a devastating situation for so many of these family members. She says she's going to appeal. What are the chances now going forward? Because, I mean, many lawyers have described this as a sweetheart deal.
Right. And victim families are understandably frustrated here, both with the deal and the fact that it feels like Boeing has been dodging responsibility on this for several years. As you were discussing earlier, 346 people died more than 5 years ago in 2 crashes. And yet, here we are still today. Boeing has not yet resolved the civil cases, and Boeing still has a pending criminal case. And directly to answer your question, right now, the status is a deal is on the table. If Boeing accepts, a judge has to approve. Generally speaking, though, judges tend to approve plea deals if they're stipulated to by both the Department of Justice and the defendant.
I guess, Mark, just again, talking to Zipporah, and she's talked about what justice would look like and that the fact that they will continue to appeal and fight this case. Do you think that the outcome could potentially change?
I'll point out that part of the frustration here is the felony Boeing is pleading guilty to is, quote, conspiracy to defraud, end quote. What they ought to be pleading guilty to is manslaughter. People died because of Boeing's negligence and misconduct. That said, if this deal goes through, and by the way, Boeing has to accept this deal. The evidence is overwhelming. Their executives have made public admissions. If they don't plead, they're going to end up in a highly public trial, and they've got too much dirty laundry to risk at trial. So I expect Boeing will take the deal, and I also expect the judge will approve the deal.
Okay, we appreciate your time and your thoughts, Mark, and for joining us on the programme. And of course, Zipporah, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, that's all for tonight's programme. The News at 10 is next with the latest on the general election campaign entering its final week. We'll have all of that coverage on Sky News throughout the week. We're back tomorrow at 9 p.m, of course, for all of the global news. See you then. Good night for now.